列一間酒店，地底一個南斯拉夫民兵使用嘅軍事設施。北約對中國大使館中彈以及有人員死傷表示遺憾。有線電視記者鄺慧常報導。
中國強烈譴責北約擊中駐南斯拉夫嘅中國大使館係粗暴侵犯中國嘅主權，並且提出最強烈嘅抗議。由歐普樹報導。
中國中央電視台喺5間新聞讀出政府聲明，對北約擊中中國大使館提出最強烈抗議。
以美國為首的北約對南斯拉夫40多天的狂轟濫炸，已經造成無辜平民大量傷亡。現在又居然轟炸中國大使館，北約的這一行徑是對中國主權的粗暴侵犯，也是對外交關係公約和國際關係基本準則的肆意踐踏，這在外交史上是罕見的。中國政府和人民對這一野蠻暴行表示極大的憤慨和嚴厲的譴責，並提出最強烈的抗議。以美國為首的北約必須對此承擔全部責任，中國政府保留採取進一步措施的權利。
而中國駐聯合國代表秦華宣就喺聯合國安理會開會磋商之前，譴責北約，話襲擊中國大使館係野蠻行為。
We strongly condemn NATO's act and would express our indignation. NATO's barbarian act is a gross violation of the United Nations Charter, international law, and the norms governing international relations. It is also a violation of the Geneva Convention. NATO should be responsible for all the consequences. We call on NATO to stop immediately its military actions so as to avoid further humanitarian disaster. The Chinese side will make further reaction as we try to learn the details of the bombing.
有線電視記者歐普樹報導。
中國官方新華社發表聲明，對北約嘅導彈擊中中國使館，令到新華社駐貝爾格萊德記者邵雲環喪生，提出最強烈嘅抗議。而中國駐南斯拉夫嘅大使館遇襲之後，中國對北京嘅美國大使館加強保安，加派公安喺大使館附近把守，防止有群眾走到使館抗議。而美國就表示，暫時未能夠證實係咪北約嘅導彈擊中使館，但係對於有人命傷亡表示歉意。而聯合國安理會就應中國嘅要求，召開緊急會議，討論中國大使館中彈嘅事件。黎鳳如報導。
聯合國安理會應中國要求開會討論中國大使館遇襲事件。喺安理會開會前，南斯拉夫駐聯合國代辦表示，北約擊中中國駐南斯拉夫大使館並唔係意外事故。佢指責北約嘅空襲係侵犯國際和平嘅罪行。佢呼籲北約立即停止空襲，透過外交途徑解決科索沃危機。而美國對南斯拉夫嘅中國大使館中彈，導致人命傷亡，表示遺憾。美國駐聯合國副大使伯利話，暫時仲未能夠證實中國大使館係咪真係被北約戰機嘅導彈擊中。如果導彈真係誤中中國大使館，佢表示歉意。
And apologize that we never target civilians. NATO never targets civilians and would never target an embassy.
聯合國秘書長安南對中國駐南斯拉夫大使館中彈表示震驚同難過。安南透過發言人呼籲要立即透過政治途徑急切解決科索沃危機。有線電視記者黎鳳如報導。
中國駐南斯拉夫大使館被北約導彈擊中，請繼續留意本台有關嘅消息。返嚟本港，特區政府表示，仲係評估緊167萬港人內地子女如果嚟香港對社會同埋經濟嘅影響。
An incident is not an accident, is not a collateral damage. This is one accepted harm, one accepted crime by those who had decided to stage a total war against Yugoslavia.
Now, the UN Secretary General, who is in Washington overnight, he met earlier on Friday with Secretary of State Albright, has come out and given a reaction to the bombing of the Chinese embassy. Kofi Annan said in a statement that he is shocked and distressed not only by the assault on the Chinese buildings, but also the striking of a hospital and market in the city of Niš. So again, to update, the UN Security Council still behind closed doors in what is known around here as consultations. It is unclear whether they will move to the formal horseshoe table area for a meeting, in which case there will definitely be very blunt talk with each nation stating its case, with China and Russia no doubt calling for a halt in the NATO bombing, and the United States, France, United Kingdom, NATO ally members saying let's look at the big picture, and the target remains the government of Yugoslavia's treatment of Kosovar Albanians. Marina?
CNN's Richard Roth reporting from the United Nations. NATO has not confirmed that it hit the Chinese embassy. CNN's John Radler is at NATO headquarters in Brussels, Belgium with the latest. John?
Marina, about 3 hours ago, NATO issued a statement, and I will read from that statement verbatim. It says, NATO did not intentionally target the Chinese embassy in Belgrade. NATO regrets any damage to the embassy or injuries to Chinese diplomatic personnel. The statement goes on to say, once again, NATO attacks were meticulously planned to minimize any damage to civilian infrastructure and innocent loss of life. Elsewhere in that statement, Marina, NATO also confirms that its attacks on Belgrade on Friday night into Saturday morning were the most concentrated attack to date on the Yugoslav capital. And Marina, this is the second time now in the past 12 hours that NATO has had to issue statements about possibly errant weapons. Earlier, it released a statement saying that, and again I quote, unfortunately, it is highly probable that a weapon, in this case a cluster bomb, went astray and hit civilian buildings, that in Niš, the city of Niš, third biggest city in Yugoslavia, on Friday. Marina?
John, how come NATO is able to establish that, in fact, the hospital was hit by missiles that went astray, and yet we're not able to establish whether the Chinese embassy has been hit by missiles that have gone astray?
Well, if I might just repeat the wording of the statement about the incident in the city of Niš, it says, unfortunately, it is highly probable that a weapon went astray and hit civilian buildings. One of the reasons NATO came out with that statement as being somewhat more solid, perhaps, than the statement over the Chinese embassy is that it happened some 12 hours earlier, and therefore they had an additional 12 hours or so to investigate as best NATO can, given that it does not have people on the ground in Belgrade or in the city of Niš to confirm, to assess, to analyze. Marina?
CNN's John Radler reporting from NATO headquarters in Brussels, Belgium. And CNN's Jonathan Karl is following the latest developments from the Pentagon. He joins us now for an update. Jonathan?
Well, Marina, as you've heard, NATO categorically denying that it targeted the Chinese embassy, but NATO saying that last night was the most intense day of attacks on the city of Belgrade since the start of the air campaign. Several targets within range of that Chinese embassy. Key targets included the Hotel Yugoslavia, which is located, described by an official here, as across the street. We've heard about 300 meters from the Chinese embassy. The Hotel Yugoslavia, NATO officials saying, not simply a hotel, but also the location of Arkan Tigers, the notorious Arkan being the indicted war criminal, and his Tigers being the paramilitary group accused of doing ethnic cleansing in Kosovo, saying that hotel housed a barracks for the Tigers and their command and control center. Also, the other key central target hit last night, the second time NATO has targeted a residence of Slobodan Milosevic, the Yugoslav president. Mr. Milosevic, one of his presidential palaces hit. Again, NATO saying they weren't targeting Mr. Milosevic himself. In fact, they weren't targeting his residence, but they were targeting what lies below it, which, according to an official here, was a central command and control bunker for the Yugoslav military. In fact, they said this may be the central command and control bunker used. Also, several other targets hit throughout the city of Belgrade, and again, the most intense night of attacks. Targets including the Ministry of Defense North, the Ministry of Defense South, the Army General Staff Building, and relay stations. Also, again, for the second time, going after the power grid in Belgrade. NATO hit 4 central power stations in Belgrade using a top-secret weapon that they used once before, a top-secret weapon that distributes this graphite powder, or a carbon powder, that shorts out these electrical facilities without doing permanent damage to the infrastructure.